Secretary Northey, Sean McMahon from the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, and Shane Wolf, who is the Miller Creek Watershed Project Coordinator. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Today, we're discussing our statewide efforts to improve water quality. In Iowa, we're blessed with some of the most productive land. I've seen firsthand the great work being done to improve water quality in both rural and urban areas. During our travels across the state, the Lieutenant Governor and I have visited a number of targeted demonstration projects, projects like the one that Shane is leading, where project coordinators are working hand in hand with farmers on adopting new practices focused on water quality. We've also saw innovative new practices like wetlands, bioreactors, and saturated buffers. And some of those practices were developed right here in Iowa. One thing that I think can't be underscored, and that really is how we've built a wide range of partnerships comprised of diverse stakeholders who really share a common goal of improving water quality and creating new economic opportunities. These partnerships are a great way to grow vital funding resources, to really collaborate and coordinate. They also support those efforts between the public and the private sectors that allow us to scale best practices. In fact, the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy's annual report cited $340 million is directed to programs to improve water quality in our great state. Today, I want to highlight another tool that's bringing additional resources to Iowa, and that's the USDA's Regional Conservation Partnership Program, or RCPP, which promotes increased coordination between the USDA, the state, and local and private organizations. This coordination focuses on improving soil conservation and protecting water quality. We've been fortunate to receive a number of grants for Iowa through this program. And among those grants is support for the Midwest Agriculture Water Quality Partnership Program, which just say that 3 times and see if you can do that without messing it up. The project was the largest awarded in 2016 in total, it's a $48.5 million project with 47 partners. And that includes $10 million in USDA funds, $38 million in non-federal partner match. The funds are targeted towards 5 priority watersheds that are targeting improvement. And due to the partnerships discussed today, we're able to multiply funding and combine expertise. Through those efforts and by embracing a can-do spirit, we're making critical water quality improvements that impact the quality of life for Iowans now and into the future. So with that, I would ask the Lieutenant Governor to come to the podium and share a few words.
Thank you, Governor. As Governor Reynolds stated during our 99 county tour last year, we repeatedly heard that the voluntary approach outlined by the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy is working. Statewide, farmers and 220 local organizations are collaboratively partnering in 56 demonstration projects in targeted watersheds. And this is an issue that affects all of us, regardless of where we live. We've seen the hard work being done to improve water quality in our large cities like Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Sioux City, and the Quad Cities, and even in our smaller cities like Storm Lake, Denison, Lakeview, and Bloomfield. We're seeing more urban and rural collaboration like this to address water quality, and we're very encouraged by that. We're excited about this particular project and what it represents in terms of outside investment flowing into the state to support our work on water quality. This project is focused on supporting farmer profitability and sustainability. It's building public-private capacity for conservation, integrating precision ag with conservation, and improving soil health. And it's also increasing pollinator and wildlife habitat. So there's a lot of great stuff going on. And at this time, I'd like to invite Secretary Northey to the podium to share some more specifics on the progress that's being made.
Well, thank you all. Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for your leadership and support on the water quality effort. This targeted approach, watershed by watershed, is scaling up across Iowa. And we're excited about the role of this project and helping us to be able to scale up. So the additional funding here in this RCPP, this Regional Conservation Partnership Program, has allowed Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship, Iowa Water Alliance, Ag Water Alliance, to reach out for new partnerships and to strengthen existing partnerships. And really kind of a couple areas we focused on: the outreach, that ability to talk to producers, and the adoption, that scaling up of practices. So for the outreach, public and private partners have worked hard to share information with producers and landowners. We've had over 80 field days, 24 webinars, and nearly 200 other outreach activities to talk to farmers and producers, and farmers and landowners. And we have reached nearly 12,000 landowners through those efforts the last couple of years. So as we look at adoption of practices, we have used of that $9.5 million worth of federal money. 1.23 million of that already has been invested in watershed activities in these project areas, in addition to the other matching dollars, both state and private dollars that have been a part of that. And that's happened across 11 counties here in Iowa. These funds are used to support cover crops, no-till incentives, strip-till incentives, fertilizer management, bioreactors, and saturated buffers, all of which impact about 1.35 million acres through this project. With this funding, we've been able to also form a partnership with 2 private firms to work with producers on conservation planning. It stretches our resources to be able to reach all the places we need to. And so it's important to be able to get more conservation planning. And so this has allowed us to be able to do that. The goal for this effort with these 2 organizations is to have 240 conservation plans written that would cover 46,000 acres of cropland. This planning helps us put the right practice in the right place and make sure that we're getting the most for our water quality dollars. And we're seeing exciting progress in some of our targeted watershed areas. So, for example, we have a project area in the North Raccoon River, the headwaters of the North Raccoon River, and we've seen the cover crop acres there quadruple from 2016 to 2017. So we now have about 7.25% of the farmed area there, the cropland area, in cover crops. And so as you can see, RCPP is helping to improve water quality. So now I'm going to turn it over to Shane Wolf, and he'll talk a little bit more about his projects. He's had some great successes in his project in the Miller Creek watershed area.
Thank you, Secretary Northey. I'm happy to share today the progress that has been made at the local level in the Miller Creek watershed. It all started by working with the Iowa Soybean Association and the Miller Creek Advisory Council in 2014 to develop a watershed plan. The plan involved various stakeholders living in the watershed. Key to the plan has been engaging farmers at the watershed level to improve water quality while also helping improve farmer profitability. Today, I'm happy to report that farmers in the Miller Creek watershed are implementing water quality and conservation practices so quickly. Their efforts are outgrowing the amount of local, state, and national funds available for cost share opportunities. Our original goal was to have 2,000 acres of cover crops in 2017. We surpassed that goal, and there were nearly 6,500 acres of cover crops in 2017. This equals 16% cover crop coverage of total row crop acres in our watershed, and this is just using cost share funding. So we estimate nearly 20% of all row crop acres were in cover crops in 2017. Our next goal will be to have half of our watershed in cover crops. The Midwest Ag Water Quality Partnership, RCPP, will provide additional resources to scale up quickly over the next few years. In fact, our next goal is to have half those acres in watershed in cover crops. As we plan for this year in 2019, we continue to utilize the watershed plan and continue to target practices in the places that will have the largest impact on water quality. This is especially important with edge of field practices such as bioreactors and saturated buffers. There have been 3 bioreactors and 2 saturated buffers installed in the watershed, and there are 2 more planned. To meet the funding demand for more practices, the Iowa Agricultural Water Alliance helped us create the Miller Creek Challenge Grant 2 months ago. We are seeking an additional $100,000 from the community to help fund practices for the next 2 to 3 years of projected growth. I can report that we have individuals both within and outside the watershed who have contributed to the Miller Creek Challenge. One of the most rewarding was a contribution from a gentleman who previously lived in Iowa but now lives in Chicago. We are currently reaching out to private businesses and local and regional organizations, and it's looking very promising that we will meet our ambitious fundraising goal. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention how important it is to have a group of very engaged local farmer leaders and soil and water conservation district commissioners. Their support continues to be a key to our success. With the support, our long-term goal is to become the first watershed of our size to reach the goals of the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy. I'll now turn it over to Sean McMahon, Executive Director of the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for that great report, Shane. The Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance is very pleased to be supporting your excellent efforts there in Miller Creek and Blackhawk County in the Middle Cedar watershed. And in addition to Miller Creek and the headwaters of the North Raccoon example that Secretary Northey shared, I wanted to share with you that there's also great progress happening in other watersheds throughout Iowa. For instance, in Carroll County, in Elk Run, there's been a 500% increase in cover crops from last year to this year. And in Washington County, in the West Fork of Crooked Creek, they now have cover crops on about 15% of all of their row crop acres. And we're seeing in the Iowa watersheds where we're working that there's a lot of common denominators to that success, or you might say critical success factors, where we have a watershed plan, where we have technical assistance capacity in the form of boots on the ground. For instance, a strong watershed coordinator who can help do the outreach to farmers, where we have very engaged local farmer leaders, very engaged local agribusinesses, and some additional financial assistance, such as through this Midwest Agriculture Water Quality Partnership that we're very pleased to co-lead with IDALS. We're seeing that we're able to move the needle in terms of scaling up conservation practices that will improve water quality, and in many instances will help improve farmer profitability as well. So the watershed approach is really key to ensuring that we're targeting and getting the biggest bang for the buck for taxpayer dollars and our scarce resources. And we're targeting at two levels. On the one hand, there's the priority watersheds, which IDALS has laid out in the Water Quality Initiative. But then within those watersheds, we're also targeting the priority acres where conservation practices will be most effective. And we're using cutting-edge web-based tools to determine where conservation practices will have the biggest positive impact. So I wanted to report to all of you today that the watershed approach is working in Iowa, and we are moving the needle to improve water quality. And that is why the Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, IDALS, the Iowa DNR, and Conservation Districts of Iowa have created a new watershed award to really recognize the great work that watershed coordinators and others are doing at the watershed level to improve soil health and improve water quality for the Iowans, both upstream and downstream. We believe that this new watershed award will provide even further momentum to the great work that's happening as Iowa farmers, agribusinesses, conservation organizations, urban and rural leaders, non-point source and point source communities come together to improve water quality. So that, thank you very much. And we would now like to open it to questions.
Thank you very much. We'd open up questions on this topic.
What indications do you have that you are moving the needle and that water is being improved?
Well, yeah, and Bill does it in his report too.
So we've seen really good progress at reducing sediment and phosphorus concentrations in Iowa over the last few decades. In 1980, the average acre of Iowa farmland had about 7.5 tons of soil per acre erode per year. And in 2014, that was reduced to about 5 tons per acre. During the same time, we've seen phosphorus concentrations go down each year in our waterways by about 2.1%. So farmers in Iowa have really heeded the call to conserve soil more effectively, and they've been implementing terraces, grassed waterways, no-till, and other practices to reduce that soil erosion. Nitrate is a bit more challenging. Of course, nitrogen is soluble, so it moves with the water. But as we heard from Governor Reynolds, we've pioneered practices right here in Iowa, like bioreactors, saturated buffers, nutrient treatment wetlands, that are highly effective at reducing nitrate concentrations where we have tiling or subsurface drainage. So we're just at the beginning stages of scaling up those practices, but we're really starting to turn our attention and resources to that, and we're starting to get promising results.
Do you have any efforts to show any results on the nitrate issue?
Well, according to the Iowa DNR and Iowa Geological Survey, statewide, the nitrogen concentrations have stabilized over the last 2 decades. That's not to suggest that we're satisfied with that progress. We still have a lot more work to be done, and we need additional resources to meet the scale of that challenge, but we are making progress.
Let me add, we have dramatically stepped up the amount of measuring that we've been able to do. So both in our larger systems, but especially in our smaller watersheds where we're able to see more of an impact. You heard some watersheds where we're dramatically increasing the amount of cover crops. We're able to add some water quality practices. We've been able to determine certainly that these practices are making improvements. So we have constant monitoring of most of the nutrient reduction wetlands and many of the bioreactors as well that show a significant reduction coming out of those practices versus going in. So as we add more of those practices, we know we're reducing the amount of nitrate that ends up in our rivers, lakes, and streams. And we have been able to see in a few cases where we've been able to match watersheds where we have a watershed where we have more practices and those where we don't have as many practices, that we're seeing a difference and improvement in those watersheds that have practices, but those still are on very small scales yet. So it's hard to get the numbers for a large scale. Often the numbers on a large scale are overwhelmed by the impact of weather. So a large amount of rainfall in 1 year is going to have an impact on, especially on nitrate, as Sean mentioned. That is going to overwhelm maybe the differences right now on a large scale, but we're able to see the differences on the smaller scale where we're making improvements.
I know that you have a figure here of 2,600 Iowa farmers participating in this cost share program. General figure in my head that we have something like 80,000 farms in Iowa. Is that too small of a figure there? Is it time for not a voluntary program, but a mandatory program of participation?
So that is the number for the statewide cover crop initiative. So that's one part of the program that's outside of this RCPP that's out there. That's outside of the districts. That's outside of the NRCS's cost share program as well. We believe that we have about 600,000 acres of cover crops. That was as of fall of 2016. We're still trying to get the numbers for 17, and we believe that's grown. That compares to 6 years ago when we had probably less than 50,000 acres. So we're seeing a growth. And we have seen surveys that said about 20% of Iowa's farmers are trying cover crops. Most of the folks that put in cover crops are only putting them in on a small part of their land as they're trying to figure out how it works with rotations and planting and making sure that they don't negatively affect next year's crop. So we are seeing dramatic growth, dramatic engagement. I really believe that we're going to see that kind of engagement because we engage many people. To be able to have a program where we force folks, we're going to create all kinds of other issues that are not going to help us speed this up, that this is the way, and we're seeing more engagement than most other places around the country. So I'm very, very pleased with the amount of progress that we've made in the last 5 years, but we have more to do.
If you get more money through the legislature's water quality initiative, will you actually be able to move faster in this program, or are you already moving at the pace that people are ready to accept, the program? In other words,
I think you always demand exceed.
Does more money translate into more people being willing to do so?
Well, it's not just about money, as you heard, and we can't look at it in isolation. There's a lot of great practices that are happening all across the state. But we want to make sure when we talk about water quality and making sure that we're providing not only soil health, but water quality, that we have a dedicated and growing long-term revenue source so that we can continue to scale best practices. I think, Bill, you probably have request more than you're able to meet the demands, and we still have farmers that are going ahead and doing it on their own. But that's the goal. We believe we have the right strategy, and when we talk about funding for water quality, we'll make sure that we have a dedicated long-term and growing revenue source so that we can identify best practices and scale those across the state of Iowa.
And one of, if I may continue to answer just a second, one of the things that we see for a program like this is the example of being able to take some of those state dollars and leverage and find other dollars to bring more needs, but we're also taking those dollars, bringing in many more partners, both private dollars, but in this case, one of the largest regional conservation program partnership programs out there, engaging folks in a way that I think that demand is going to continue to grow, and we're going to continue to need more resources, including not only cover crops, but bioreactors and saturated buffers, other edge of field practices that need to happen as well.
Leveraging that money is one thing you can't necessarily do now without the legislature's help. Are there other things that you can't do now, if the legislature doesn't?
We have been able to leverage. We certainly are leveraging with this. We have a list, I believe, in our water quality initiative report that's available here that you can pick up as well. It lists about 6 other RCPPs that are here in Iowa as well. So we have been leveraged. Now, it will be easier to leverage if we have predictable funding going forward as well. So that's one of the things that would allow us to be able to do more leveraging in the future.
And I think also too, with precision and innovation, we're going to continue to see those best practices change. And so what the costs are today might not be reflective to what the costs are in the future. Precision farming, data, all allows farmers to make better decisions. And when it comes to water quality and soil health and the number of inputs that's required. And so there's a startup company that's looking at providing a great technology for some of our wastewater treatment facilities. So it's still in the beginning stage or startup stages. But so as innovative ideas come forward and technology continues to increase, we have to be flexible and realize that it's not going to look the future's not going to look like it does today. And so that's also an opportunity.
Governor said that, go ahead.
Set a goal of reducing phosphorus and nitrate by 45%. Where are you in that?
So we've had some, and actually we'll have a future report that'll talk a little bit about how much progress has been made, especially on the phosphorus front. We're looking at some of the baseline going forward. We have some watershed projects where we're seeing more growth. As Sean said, it's a lot easier to see on the phosphorus side because we've been focused on soil erosion control for a long, long time. It's tougher to see on the nitrogen side. And as I mentioned, it's certainly impacted greatly by the amount of weather impacts, so the amount of rainfall that's out there. Statewide, we have lots of numbers that we can share. We'll be glad to be able to share some of those. There's lots of folks that are looking at small watersheds, large watersheds, trying to normalize those for different years, and we can get you some of those numbers.
Governor, you said that there are more requests from farmers than there's currently enough money to, and Secretary Murphy shook his head. Is that true? Can I say that? Okay. And then Secretary Norley, the Senate bill, the House bill has more of the House approach, House's amendment to the Senate bill, has more emphasis on watershed approach than the Senate bill does. So why are you backing the Senate bill?
Go ahead.
I'd be very glad to mention that. I think that the House bill or the Senate bill that's in front of the House certainly is an approach I think that's very doable in a place that is very easy to do. I also think it's an approach that allows great flexibility for us to be able to do the things the governor talked about, and that's to be able to approach the changing technologies. It also allows us to expand the work that we have been doing. That's working in watersheds. So our approach on this effort has been through an RCPP, through watershed approaches, through approaches like Shane has all across the state. So all that we're doing is a watershed approach, and we have the flexibility in that Senate bill to be able to do that with the full flexibility of being able to address not only cover crops, but expand into the edge of field practices with a predictable funding source.
What do you mean, is it a place that?
I think it's certainly in front of the House in a way that they can consider it and hopefully support it very soon.
Spoke on engagements, specifically with the Miller Creek watershed. Could
You wanted to say something anyway, I think.
some of we know there's lots of farmers who are involved and who are trying to get more involved. But what about the farmers who aren't as engaged or are not as involved? How are you reaching out to them specifically in the Miller Creek watershed?
So, finding those engaging producers that wanted to work with the project right away is the easy part, right? They came to our office, knew the project was going on. But one of the ways that we're meeting those producers, landowners, farmers that may, be a bit hesitant at first is working with well-respected producers already in the watershed that are our farmer leaders that are engaging in these conservation practices. And, I just wanted to, throw an example out of really what was being discussed. This past fall, we actually had to turn away five applications. And what's unique about Miller Creek is we're actually in 2 of those RCPP federal project areas. And we have our own state WQI funding as well, and still did not have the resources for demand. And just to emphasize again, that's the reason for the Miller Creek Challenge of trying to work with citizens, businesses, organizations to raise those additional funds.
If I could just have a quick answer to that. There's another strategy for engaging farmers that haven't typically done conservation practices, and that is leveraging agribusinesses, particularly ag retailers, co-ops, independent crop consultants, the certified crop advisors or CCAs that are really those trusted partners of farmers. So we're leveraging that to hopefully create a de facto private sector conservation service and get information, the technical assistance that farmers need for those conservation practices. It's important to note that for this RCPP project we're talking about, there are 19 agribusinesses that are actively engaged, actively reaching out to their farmer customers and having conservation conversations with their farmers about practices that can both improve water quality and also increase yields and profitability. So we're really starting to make progress in reaching farmers that typically don't walk through the door of their local USDA office, but work through their private sector network of agronomists.
Can I ask about the ICN? Very critical report last week from the state auditor, citing a lack of oversight. What's happened on the watch of the grants to your administration? You're obviously, there's certainly a potential for your opponents in this election to say, where was Governor Reynolds, Lieutenant Governor Reynolds, when this happened? What's your response? What happened? And number one,
I'm not sure that's a question. It almost sounds like a statement, Bill. Is there a question in that? Kind of. Okay.
What's your take on
Yeah.
this? How are you going to respond?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let's just, in July, we had the staff from the ICN contact our office and briefed us on some concerns. Immediately, we advised them to get a hold of the auditor's office and to continue consulting with the AG's office. Just last week, the audit was released, and it exposed significant flaws with the ICN and accountability, the accountability structure. And so the ICN board has taken immediate action to rectify what was acknowledged in the report that was done by the state auditor's office, and the individual that was primarily responsible is gone. So that's the steps that have been taken. I think once we became aware of it, we told them or asked them to contact the auditor's office so that they could do a review. It's my understanding they were there the next day, so they acted immediately as well. They did what they needed to do through the audit purposes, release the audit. We understand where the lack of accountability was in the structure, and they've identified it. And so I think they've taken proper action. The individual is no longer there, and they're moving forward.
Regarding the representative, do you think that elected leaders need to do?
Well, first of all, I just want to start by saying that my thoughts and prayers are with Representative Baltimore. It starts with admitting that you made a mistake, and he has done that. It starts with taking responsibility, and he's also done that and said, you know, it was a horrible decision, and he takes responsibility for that. He's apologized, and he says, you know, I understand consequences. There are consequences, and he agrees with the consequences and the action that Speaker Uppmeyer took. And so I believe they've handled it. I'll continue to keep him in my thoughts and prayers and move forward from there.
Governor, Republicans from both chambers have indicated that when it comes to the mid-year budget cuts, they might consider a cushion. Both have used that language to say a little bit more than the 30 to 35 million. I'm curious what you think about that, because it ultimately could mean more mid-year budget cuts. And obviously that's not what you recommended. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what you think.
Well, this is how the process works. So we put a lot of time into presenting our budget, to working with our agencies to work with the amount of revenue we have to based on the December revenue estimating conference. And we put together our recommendations for a balanced budget based on the research and due diligence that we've done. And so now it goes to the legislature. They take a look at that and they put their budget together. And then the conversation begins. And so we'll continue to work with them. I'll continue to talk about why we did what we did. I'll listen to what their suggestions or recommendations might be. And that's how you move it forward, and you put a budget forward. And so that's the process that we're in right now. And we'll continue to have those discussions. I'm not going to draw any line in the sand. I'm not going to say this is what I expect. That's not healthy. I think rather the conversation and the communication back and forth is how you get to resolution. And that's the process that we're in right now.
What's your, do you have a plan in case the federal government shutdown goes on? What would you say would be the immediate effects on the state? And I recall in 2013, your family was affected by that.
Yeah.
So, you know that Iowans are maybe affected by this.
Yeah, well, our military, our Iowans, our federal workers are all being affected by the decisions that are made in Washington, D.C. It's my understanding there may be close to a resolution. They need to do that. They need to get their job done. We are monitoring it daily. The Department of Management, Director Roeder, is monitoring the effects of what that would mean to state government. So, but it's, you know, they need to do the job. They need to come to resolution. There's time to deal with policy down the road, and they need to do the job and get it done. And I believe they will. They have in the past. I believe they will. And so, but if they don't, we're prepared to address it and monitoring it every day. Well, you know, a good chunk of our money comes from the federal level. So whether it's DHS or whether it's public health or whether it's, Medicaid. So we're CHIP. We're monitoring all those very carefully. The initial review looks like we'll be fine through March when it comes to CHIP. That's something that would significantly impact children across the state. So that's the kind of monitoring that we're doing to see when they come in, what the impact would be. But my message is, they need to do their job. They need to get it done. This is what Iowans are so sick of and Americans are tired of, this political back and forth, the game playing, the blaming each other, not taking responsibility. They were elected to go out there and represent the constituents and to get things done. And it has kicked the ball down the road. Budgeting practices is just not helpful. It provides no stability or predictability. We don't do that in Iowa. We figure out a way to, we've done it when it's been a split legislature or when we've had both. It doesn't matter. We work together, we get things done, and we do our job, and they need to do the same thing. Yeah, they need to do their job. They need to get it done.
Governor, the correctional officer who was stabbed 5 times in October spoke publicly this weekend, in addition to raising some concerns about staffing levels and maximum security.
Mm-hmm.
He said that sometimes the radios inside the prison, the new prison, don't work.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had asked for a review after some incidents in the prison.
Mm-hmm.
What's the status of that review, and do you have concerns about operations of
Well, I have complete confidence in Jerry Bartruff, Director Bartruff, and so we do a quarterly, monthly meeting with department heads where they have an opportunity to update us on some of the issues that we're dealing with. And he'll have an opportunity at that point to brief us and to bring us up to date. But I do have complete confidence in him to manage the resources and to manage the agency. And they're continually looking at ways that they can provide the services. If it's an operational or if it's functional, then we'll have to address that, of course.
Governor, Republicans have been raising some questions about the $10 million
Mhm.
cut to Medicaid for the mid-year budget cut. Your staff and others have said, the Department of Human Services says it's not a cut, it's savings because the enrollment is going down.
Mhm.
But again, Republicans are raising questions about it. What's the message that they need to keep in mind about this proposal?
Well, first of all, it's not a choice or it's not a cut because the cost depends on the number of individuals that are enrolled in the system. And we make that estimate at the beginning of the year for the fiscal year. And it's something that we monitor daily, monthly, because those numbers change. And so the budget that I presented is really in line with the current projection. So again, that's part of the conversation and the discussion that we'll have moving forward, but it's not an option. It's based on the number of Iowans that are in the Medicaid system, and it's an entitlement, and we're responsible for paying that. So it's not an option, it's not a choice. It's truly based on the number of individuals that are in the system, and then we have to fund that. Thank you.